quickly and directly on your point, where people do have their claims processed and they fail, they should be swiftly removed to where they came from. We can cooperate across borders, and that's not some kind of weakness. It's absolutely essential. These criminals do not respect national borders.
That there seem to be a lot of Muslim men tooling up and creating throngs and chasing around the streets. I mean, yeah.
Message. Muslim communities are going to vote with their feet and they're going to teach Labour Party a lesson for this treacherous betrayal.
Is Starmer desperate for support, or is this just another horrible move that'll sink the Labour government? Things have been rocky in Britain for a while now. The Labour leader appears to have launched an all-out war in a rather subtle way on Muslim immigrants. But isn't Starmer the same man who once championed tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity? Ah, the irony. In a move that reeks of panic, Starmer has shocked the nation with his hardline rhetoric on immigration, mostly targeting Muslim communities. What exactly led to this abrupt shift? And what does it say about his leadership or lack thereof? As the UK braces for the fallout, one question lingers: has Starmer just declared war on more than just a community, but on his credibility too? Here's what he had to say about immigrants, who are mostly from Muslim countries.
Oh, we have to stop the boats. I mean, nobody should accept these terrible crossings across the Channel. I think the most effective way to stop the boats is to smash the criminal gangs, and they are criminal gangs, that are running this vile trade and putting people in the boats in the first place. And as you know, before I became a politician, I was the chief prosecutor for England and Wales, and I was involved in joint operations with other countries to smash, in my case, terrorist gangs.
That's a very charged statement with many subtle hints that people didn't pick up at first. He mentioned that the boats must be stopped and the gangs must be smashed. But who is he referring to as these gangs? It becomes more clear when he mentions the terrorists. Most of the immigrants are Muslims. Now, granted that Starmer is no far-right extremist, he still does value compassion, but his stance on Muslim immigrants is rather clear and strict here. He'll accept none of them.
I do want to see those gangs smashed so that people don't arrive in the first place. And I know it can be done because I spent 5 years of my life on similar operations. Secondly, I want to see those that do arrive processed. Now this will be astonishing, I think, for anybody watching. Of all the people that arrived by small boat in the last year or so, only 1% have had their claim actually processed. That is intolerable.
Intolerable, he says. And he's quite right in this case. Many immigrants just waltz into Britain through these boats and file a claim. Whether or not that claim is bogus cannot be known unless the case is heard and the facts are seen. They remain here indefinitely until their claims are processed, which is usually never, and we bear the cost. No more unprocessed immigrants. Wow, would you look at that? Starmer is right for once.
Direct answer to your question, where an asylum claim has failed, then it's possible to send the person back to the country they came from in the first place. Now, to be fair, that's what happened, it is happening with Albania, where there is now a scheme in place, and the government's negotiated that, and that is a step in the right direction.
67% of the total population are Muslim according to the 2023 census in Albania. Connect the dots. He supports initiatives to send them back, and this echoes the larger sentiment of European countries. They're all making deals to deport the migrants back to their home countries. Moreover, we know that Starmer wants a better relationship with Europe, so it's only natural that he's following in their footsteps.
We will set up a new command with new powers, new resources, and a new way of doing things. Border Security Command. Now, this is about leveraging the power and potential of dynamic government based on a counter-terrorism approach which we know works. An end to the fragmentation between policing, the border force, and our intelligence agencies.
Notice how he continues to link everything to a counter-terrorist approach. Is that not another subtle hint about his intentions when it comes to Muslim immigrants? Well, you might call it a stretch, but, as shown further in the video, his broader thoughts on issues like Israel and Palestine support this conclusion. He's looking to strengthen Britain's borders, and that's an excellent thing.
And that's why I've already been to The Hague with Yvette to start pushing for a new security pact with our European partners. But look, it is also my firm belief, based on years of experience in this area, that we also need new and stronger powers to bring these vile criminals to justice. Now, in some areas of criminal activity, and counter-terrorism is the most obvious.
Again, that sounds small, but it is actually a huge step. And it's not in favor of Muslim immigrants. This supports the point that he's following the European stance on Muslim immigration. In 2016, the EU signed a deal with Turkey, a frequent stop for migrants coming from Syria. By 2017, the agreement had reduced by 97% the number of migrants coming from Turkey into Greece, according to the EU Migration Commissioner. He's even changing the way our economy works, as he explains in this next interview.
Our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. Migration is part of our national story, always has been, always will be. And the Labour Party will never diminish the contribution it makes to our economy, to public services, to your businesses and our communities. But let me tell you, the days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end.
Not only is he arguing against illegal immigration, he's taking a whole different approach to immigration in general. He's trying to shift Britain away from relying on immigration so we can finally tell them goodbye and stop worrying about the dozens of problems related to them. Think about it, more jobs for British people and a better economy for us. Let's just hope that he manages to pull it off. Now, it's turned into a standoff as Starmer is losing Muslim support. What's more is his view on the Israel situation. Here's Starmer disagreeing with the need for a ceasefire.
While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now, for two reasons. One, because a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies. And as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th.
That pissed off a lot of Muslims. Starmer's pro-Israel stance didn't sit well with many Muslims, especially the immigrants, but he didn't back off. He aptly labeled Hamas a terror group that needs to be removed and continued to support Israel. Believe it or not, this line of reasoning is opposed by many Muslims, not just the immigrants. Quite a lot of them support Hamas. However, Starmer doubled down with more inflammatory statements like this one.
Everybody else, I think, who's engaged with me in the last 2 years, I think there's no doubting the commitment I've got to changing the Labour Party and tearing out anti-Semitism by its roots. That's what we said we'd do. That's what we've done.
Another thing the Muslim immigrants in Britain don't like is someone speaking up against anti-Semitism. And that's exactly what Starmer is doing. He's been hammering in his support for Israel, and it's rather clear which side he's on. The immigrants, known for their intolerant approach towards the issue, weren't huge fans of this. Starmer's showing some spine against these people, and that might be a good thing given how the situation is progressing in the UK, given the recent riots. Oh, but there's more. These statements are nothing compared to what he says next.
Israel as being an apartheid state.
Yeah.
That was embraced and supported by many members of your party, particularly on the left. Do you agree with them?
No. I've been very clear about that, and that is not the Labour Party position. So I was very clear, I think, in my comments to Labour Friends of Israel exactly where I stand on most of the major issues.
Perhaps the biggest cause of outrage within the Muslim community, and Britain in general, was this statement. Starmer went completely against the popular sentiment and said that Israel is not an apartheid state. Bold move. Especially since it earned him a lot of slack, not only from Muslim immigrants in Britain but from within his own party.
Is that there were a few hecklers, a small minority, and it wasn't the panel or those chairing the session that had to tell the hecklers to be quiet. The whole room got up.
Yes.
Thousands of ordinary Labour Party members got up and said, we're not putting up with that anymore. And for me, that's the best evidence I've got today of the huge change we've brought about in the Labour Party.
So I've only got...
There you have it. He has turned the entire Labour Party over to his side too. There were hecklers who tried to complain about his stance and support for Israel. Muslim immigrants, naturally, were a huge part of those hecklers, and they were promptly shushed. Starmer and his party will not put up with that stuff anymore. That includes heinous gangs that are predominantly from Pakistan.
Still a huge problem.
Look, child exploitation is a problem, and we should do whatever we can to bear down on it. When I was Director of Public Prosecutions between 2008 and 2013, with my Crown Prosecution Service, we brought these cases. The first Rochdale grooming case was one that I gave the green light to. So there's a bit of frustration here with the government, because for a decade we've been calling for stronger measures, things like mandatory reporting, and the government's turned a blind eye. So anything can now be done to improve the situation. Well, yes, good. But I think the question for the government is, what have you been doing for the last 10 years? Well, look, ethnicity is important, and nothing should get in the way of investigating, prosecuting child exploitation.
His words keep getting more and more harsh. Is Starmer about to become harsher on immigrants than the Conservatives were supposed to be? These gangs were majorly a disease brought by Muslim immigrants from countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. We gave them a better life and they exploited it. Now, Starmer is going against them with the full force of the law. Speaking of full force, the Muslim immigrants aren't taking it so well. In fact, a vast majority of them are complaining at any given opportunity. Here's a prime example.
Now, there's been a letter from 150 Muslim Labour councillors to the leadership over its response to the situation. You organised a letter. Why did you do that?
Well, the Labour Muslim Network supported the letter, but the letter was brought about independently and organically from Muslim councillors. And I think the reason behind that is there's a huge strength of feeling. I think the pain, the outrage, some of the anger in the communities, in the Muslim communities towards Labour, following comments not just made by Keir but by various members of the leadership, has caused huge amounts of offence.
They're doing everything they can to gain support. From writing letters to calling him out on national television. Huge amounts of offence and pain, they say. Classic victim card if I've ever seen one. The truth is, Starmer is simply standing up for British values and patriotism, a very rare occurrence but a welcome one, and the Muslim immigrants simply don't like it.
And the way to do that is, you know, we've talked about the comments that are being made. I think it's very, very clear how offensive and hurt people have been. But the position now and the call now from what's now 250 Muslim councillors is an immediate ceasefire is the position that we should be taking. Enough bloodshed.
That's not what Labour are saying. They say they want a humanitarian pause, which
Correct.
is different. Right?
Yes.
Now, they're making demands just because they have the numbers advantage. They thought they could force the Labour Party to change its position simply by writing letters. The party's position is different and clear. They want a humanitarian pause, not a ceasefire. They don't want to support one side over the other, as both have valid concerns. Meanwhile, Muslim immigrants would rather have unquestioned support than any nuanced approach. Watch him threaten the Labour Party with votes.
Do you think that some Muslim councillors, some Muslim voters who support Labour, this is something that will make them stop voting Labour again?
I think the anger is very, very high. I have to say the last 12 days or so, I think since the LBC interview, have been the hardest days of me being a Labour Party member and a Labour Party activist. The offence caused is huge, the pain in the community is deep, but
Oh, so they won't vote for the Labour Party anymore just because they refuse to comply with every demand put forward by them. Starmer's decision to go against them, at the expense of his popularity, can be devastating for him, especially considering the huge number of Muslim immigrants in Britain. Maybe that's why he has turned against these immigrants and wants to deport them before the next elections. I wish letters were all that they did. However, recently, they've taken to the streets and riots have started. Watch how dangerous the situation turned into.
Are you going to talk about the fact that there seem to be a lot of Muslim men tooling up and creating throngs and chasing around the streets? I mean, yeah, I've seen that too, and I think we should talk about that.
Riots and violent disorder, so that's how they chose to handle things over the issue of Israel. That's not how British values work. We've got this little thing called civil discourse where people talk through issues, not swing batons and set things on fire. But when these particular demands weren't met, what did they do? They took to the streets, brandishing weapons in some cases, and threatened public safety. Because hey, why not create chaos when you don't get your way, right? Now they're promising to teach the Labour Party a lesson. It's starting to make sense why Starmer is turning against them, doesn't it?
Up and down the country, wherever I go, and I often travel, I hear one very simple message. Muslim communities are going to vote with their feet and they're going to teach Labour Party a lesson for this treacherous betrayal that they've experienced and they're witnessing.
A whole Democratic Party was being threatened to be metaphorically brought to their feet. That's an incredibly bold take from the Muslims, especially the immigrants. One that didn't end well, since Starmer is now on the path to possibly deport a lot of the Muslim immigrants. He's strengthening the border and making deals with the European nations, and things aren't looking very well for the immigrants.
Protests and placards over Palestine, a familiar sight in cities across the country since last October. But will this have an impact on the next election?
These protests are a common sight now, with many shouting all sorts of chants and raising different flags. They've used their huge population as a bargaining chip to try and change the Labour Party, including Keir Starmer, to their whim. Thankfully, that hasn't worked so far, but how long till it does? Now, they've put forward ridiculous 18 demands that need to be fulfilled for them to vote for Starmer again. Watch this reporter analyse those demands.
Demands called for by a group called the Muslim Vote include cutting military ties with Israel and stopping those named Mohammed being charged more for insurance. The group has vowed to punish MPs who it sees as not being supportive of Palestine.
The audacity to make such demands is nothing short of remarkable. But really, are we even surprised? These are the same folks who walk around with the belief that Britain owes them something, a sort of colonial guilt tax. And now they want Starmer to cut ties with one of our closest Western allies in the Middle East. Sure, because clearly international relations are just a game of let's see who can throw the biggest tantrum. What really takes the cake, though, is the thinly veiled threat to punish MPs who don't sing from their hymn sheet.
And these are servants of the community, servant of the United Kingdom.
I agree with that. I agree. I certainly agree with that.
He's not just getting a thing and go to.
But he's not a servant to a religion, is he? And he's not a servant to, a parochial group's idea of what is right and wrong. I mean, there's this story of, people called Mohammed pay more for insurance. Spoiler alert, they don't.
Do they want Starmer to be a servant to the nation or a servant to them? The real question is, what do these Muslim immigrants expect? A butler in a three-piece suit ready to cater to their every need. And let's not even start on the ridiculous insurance claims. Newsflash: politicians are meant to serve the country, not play favorites. This isn't some political reality TV show where you pander to subgroups and minorities for the highest ratings. It's about running a great nation, and great nations are built on principles, not on bending over backward to appease everyone with a specific grievance. What's next? A loyalty card for pandering? Buy 10 votes, get the next election free?
300 students or staff, they have to have a prayer rooms, multi-faith rooms.
Yeah, not in school though, right? Not in school.
Not in the school as well. In the school, not.
No, you don't need it in a school, do you? You don't need that stuff in the school. It's a religion. We don't want to mix state and religion up like this. It's very bad stuff, Dr. Ramsey.
And this is how the chaos escalates, one demand after another. To everyone's surprise, Starmer actually said a big, bold no to all of it. Cut ties with Israel. Denied. Allow religious teachings in schools. Rejected. And the slippery slope we're on could land us in something like the United Sharia Kingdom before we even know it. For ages, we've managed to keep religion and government separate, and honestly, that's how it should stay. Now, what we're seeing here is Starmer taking a hardline stance that some might interpret as an all-out war on Muslim immigrants. He's toughening up border controls, strengthening alliances with Europe, and standing firm on the UK's foreign policy regarding Israel and Palestine. Naturally, these moves have sparked outrage among immigrants, leading to protests and even threats against MPs. The reality is, as Europe closes its doors to more Muslim immigration, Starmer is likely gearing up to follow suit in some capacity. In that same capacity, you can join us to keep an eye on the latest updates by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.